Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, America's Space Force, Building the Future Today, featuring Secretary of the Air Force Barbara Barrett and Chief of Space Operations, General J. Raymond. My name is Tom Zellebor, CEO of the Space Foundation, and it's a pleasure to host you today. This past spring, it was our intent to bring all of us together in Colorado Springs for the annual Space Symposium. But as we all know, the best laid plans often require adjustment, and that's exactly what we're doing with this year's program. Working with all of our partners, the 36th Space Symposium will begin on Saturday, October 31st, and conclude on Monday evening, November 2nd, at the Broadmoor Resort in Colorado Springs. The agenda is still coming together, as well as all the logistics as we assemble the world space community, but the most important part of the Space Symposium is you, the members of the space community. Your attendance and participation are what make this annual gathering like nothing else in the world, and we can't wait to host you all back in beautiful Colorado. I also want to briefly commend all of you for the unprecedented response that the space community has offered during the COVID-19 pandemic. Once again, we have distinguished ourselves as the group that has stepped up in a big way to take on this challenging situation. Whether through direct donations and support to healthcare workers, first responders, and affected families, or applying your know-how and innovation to building new ventilators and other critical care equipment to aid the fight, the space community rises to any challenge, and the Space Foundation is proud to raise its voice in thanks for what you all do. Now on to today's webinar. The word unprecedented is often used to describe the times we are living. The changes that are happening impact us all, but with changes also come opportunities. And the opportunities in today's environment are in fact unprecedented. With a global marketplace worth over $415 billion and with more than 80 nations operating in it, space is a critical infrastructure that every citizen, community, and country is connected to and dependent on. It has become a mission-critical domain with extraordinary national security implications for the United States. Today, we're going to learn more about that from two people charged with shaping the structure, mission, and operations of the U.S. Space Force. In other words, its entire future. It's not every day that you get to stand up a new branch of the military. It is truly one of those rare occasions in history where you are able to set the foundation of what will be a transformational organization, and our guests today have been given that task. Secretary of the Air Force Barbara Barrett brings an incredible array of experience from the public, private, and academic sectors. In each of those roles, she has always distinguished herself as a leader who does her research, asks great questions, and builds relationships that create success for everyone involved. Her skill set is a perfect match for the charge that she has been given to lead the Air Force and the new Space Force to be ready to respond to the threats and risks we all face. Joining her is another extraordinary public servant, Chief of Space Operations, General J. Raymond. His notable Air Force career has prepared him for a role that is as much evolutionary as it is revolutionary. As the first chief of the Space Force, he sets the standard by which all others will be measured. That's a tall order, but one General Raymond is more than qualified for and prepared to serve. It's a pleasure to welcome them to this first of its kind webinar that the Space Foundation is proud to present you. Secretary Barrett and General Raymond, thank you so much for joining us. Before we turn to their remarks, followed by a moderated question and answer period with our Vice President for Operations in Washington, Thomas Dormy, here is an exclusive video that the Secretary and the General have asked us to share.
Some people look to the stars and ask, what if? Our job is to have an answer. We have to imagine what will be imagined. Plan for what's possible while it's still impossible. Maybe you weren't put here just to ask the questions. Maybe you were put here to be the answer. Maybe your purpose on this planet isn't on this planet.
Sign me up. That video certainly made an impression on me. You're previewing this video as it is released for broadcast across the country, inspiring Americans to find their purpose in the nation's newest service, the United States Space Force. General Raymond and I are here COVID compliant in our distancing, but the space that you see between us is not the kind of space we're going to be talking about today, but instead we're going to talk to the Space Foundation gathering. As space enthusiasts look to the stars and plan for the future, the Space Foundation leads the way. Experts and advocates like you are critical to the entire Department of the Air Force, but especially to the Space Force as we build a new service and greater capability. With the Space Force's heritage of space advocacy, we are pleased to join you today with the Space Foundation to update you on several advances that build upon America's legacy of leadership in space. You may appreciate that the Department of the Air Force is declassifying some information related to space. For instance, in the video we just played, you may have caught a quick glimpse of a space vehicle previously cloaked in secrecy, the X-37B. This reusable spacecraft has completed 5 missions with a total of 2,865 days on orbit. I'd like to tell you a bit about the X-37B's next flight. The Air Force's Rapid Capability Office has combined forces with the Air Force Research Lab and now the U.S. Space Force to execute a mission that maximizes the X-37B's unique capabilities. This important mission will host more experiments than any prior X-37B flight, including 2 NASA experiments. One is a sample plate evaluating the reaction of select significant materials to the conditions in space. The second studies the effect of ambient space radiation on seeds. A third experiment, designed by the Naval Research Laboratory, transforms solar power into radio frequency microwave energy, then studies transmitting that energy to Earth. So mark your calendar. The X-37B launches from Cape Canaveral in 10 days on May 16th. The Space Force dedicates this flight to the nation's first responders and frontline professionals who keep America strong. Today, investment in space and missions like the X-37B preserve free access to and use of the space domain for all benevolent actors. To that end, the Department of the Air Force submitted a dedicated space budget for the first time in history. $15.4 billion will be invested in transformational systems, including things like next-gen OPIR, replenishment of the nation's space-based infrared systems, 2 GPS-3 satellites, and 3 national security space launches. The Department of the Air Force is expanding international partnerships and alliances. A space coalition involving the US, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, France, and Germany is building international rules base for establishing predictability in this new domain of space. And now, no stranger to the Space Foundation, Board of Colorado Springs, Chief of Space Operations General J. Raymond leads the new, lean, and agile U.S. Space Force, while also commanding U.S. Space Command. This defender of the ultimate high ground will leverage technology, reduce bureaucracy, and recruit the best and brightest minds to join an already talented team. In a few minutes, we will invite viewers to share your observations and questions. But first, Jay, would you share a few of your insights?
I sure will, Madam Secretary. Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership. Tom Zellabor, it's great to see you again. Your introduction of of our secretary was spot on, and I benefit each and every day from her strong and passionate leadership about space, and we appreciate it very much. Tom, it's great to see you again. It's great to be here with the Space Foundation. I can tell you in all sincerity that I would much rather be in Colorado Springs at the Broadmoor with about 15,000 of our closest friends and space enthusiasts talking about the critical issues and the exciting time that we face today in space. I truly look forward to the time when we're able to gather again in person in Colorado Springs. Fortunately, I think the call you made to postpone was a tough call, but it was the right call. Unfortunately, the space capabilities that we enjoy today allow us to do settings like this, and I really appreciate you providing us an opportunity to share some thoughts with those that are linked into this webcast and to your foundation. And just as Secretary Barrett discussed in her remarks, it is a critical time in space, but it's also an incredibly exciting time. There's advances being made in all sectors of the space domain, whether it's national security space, commercial space, whether it's civil space with the Moon to Mars program. I would also include international space. All of those sectors are seeing great strides and great movement going forward. And I will tell you, the foundation really helps bring all that together. And that's what I so appreciate about the opportunity to gather once a year there in Colorado Springs. International partnerships are critical to us, and we've made great strides in this area. To be perfectly blunt, years ago when the domain was a benign domain and relatively peaceful domain, partnerships weren't that critical. They are absolutely critical today, and I couldn't be more proud of the partnerships that the Secretary talked about that we've developed with our allies, and this forum helps us do just that. Over the course of the past year, the United States has elevated national security space mission, both the warfighting mission and the organized training and equipment mission, to a level commensurate with its importance to our national security. And so we've stood up U.S. Space Command last August, who has a laser focus on warfighting. And we've stood up, the President established when he signed the National Defense Authorization Act on 20 December, the United States Space Force that's focused on organized training and equipping space capabilities to provide to U.S. Space Command to be successful. These organizations, these are so vital to meeting the demands of the National Defense Strategy that has us compete, deter, and win. I will tell you, we are competing and deterring and winning today, and we will in the future. Just within the past few months, we've seen Russia maneuver a satellite with characteristics of a weapon system in proximity to a U.S. satellite. More recently, they tested a direct ascent anti-satellite weapon. And just in the past few weeks, Iran attempted to launch an operational satellite and make a claim for becoming a space power. Clearly, the strategic environment has changed. We stand ready, as I said, to compete and deter and win today. And with your help, we will be ready and we will remain the world's leader in space. So thank you, Tom, and for the Space Foundation for this opportunity. I know the Secretary and I are really looking forward to a great dialogue, and we looking forward to some great questions. With that, back to you.
Madam Secretary General Raymond, thank you for those remarks and for that incredible video as well. That was amazing. As a quick introduction, I'm Thomas Stormy, Vice President for Washington Strategic Operations for the Space Foundation. And it's my pleasure to join you for this segment of today's event, a virtual fireside chat with Secretary Barrett and General Raymond about the future of the Space Force. We've got a number of questions on a variety of topics, and some submitted by our experts and others we've actually received in advance online. And as a quick note, for those that are watching live, feel free to join us and join the conversation and ask a question using the hashtag #AskSpaceForce. So let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. So, Madam Secretary? Madam Secretary General Raymond, to get us started, I guess a lot of people ask, historically the space mission, the mission of the United States Armed Forces has been executed by the United States Air Force. So why now? Why is now the right time for a Space Force?
Why now? No time like the present. In fact, I'd say it's none too soon. When we think about the things that General Raymond just spoke of that have to do with aggressive and warlike actions, threatening actions by space competitors, it's important for us to have an entity that is focused entirely on space defense and space capability. So it is, if anything, overdue for us to have a Space Force. It's really important that we have the Space Force up and running, and it's an important partner to the United States Air Force. When you think about how dependent Americans are on space, you think of everything we count on in navigation, information, and communications. You think about everything, every day, almost every American uses space. But much of that system was built when it was a benevolent environment, a benign environment, a place that we didn't have to worry about threats. And so many of our systems are not defended and are vulnerable. And so it is important for us to deter aggressive action against American assets. But if deterrence fails, we need to be prepared to defend and if necessary, shoot back. So it is especially an important time for us to have space capabilities and a force dedicated entirely to that domain, and to build doctrine for what is the actions that are taking place in space and what is fair behavior and appropriate behavior in space.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Tom, and on a little bit. I've been an airman this weekend. Will be my 36th year in the military, 36th year anniversary in the military. And in fact, I share the same birthday, if you will, with the Space Foundation. I know your symposium originated in 1984. That's when my career originated as well. I've been an airman for all but about 4 months. And I've been a space professional in the Space Force since that time. I'm proud of that heritage. But I really view that we are at a strategic inflection point. We are at a point where our reliance on space is at an all-time high. And in the examples that I provided and the examples that the Secretary just talked about, there are threats. And this is an opportunity. We view this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to remain the best in the world, to stay ahead of those growing threats, to make sure that every American has the capability that they rely on to fuel our American way of life, and that our joint and coalition forces have the capabilities that they need to be able to fight and win our nation's wars, to provide humanitarian assistance across the globe, like our forces are doing today, and helping the COVID response. So we view this as an opportunity. Space is critical, and this is a great way for us to advance our game.
So thank you for that. To kind of stay on a similar line, and Madam Secretary General Raymond, you both mentioned partnerships, and just yesterday, Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, mentioned close cooperation with the Space Force tracking near-Earth objects. And so on that theme of partnerships, how will the Space Force integrate with the overall national security space apparatus? Will it work directly in collaboration with other agencies such as the NRO, with NASA, even the FCC or FAA, Department of Commerce?
Well, absolutely. General, I'd invite you to add to this, but it is core to space that it's a cooperative environment. So, of course, the Space Force is working closely with NASA, as Administrator Bridenstine mentioned. Later this month, there's going to be a NASA launch, an exciting launch for the first time in almost a decade that an American rocket from American soil will launch American astronauts, including an Air Force officer and a Marine officer, to space. It's really a breakthrough moment for us, a return to leadership for us, but that couldn't happen without cooperation between NASA and the United States Air Force and Space Force. But the United States Space Force works cooperatively with others as well. We work with the Commerce Department, the FAA, of course, the FCC for communications items, and of course the National Space Council was pivotal to the establishment of the US Space Force. So cooperation within the United States government is key to what the United States Space Force is achieving and will continue to be, as that we're all dependent upon each other.
Yeah, I agree. Partnerships are in our DNA. We can't do this mission without our partnerships. We've worked very hard to enhance those partnerships over the past several years. And I put them in three areas. We work very hard to enhance the partnerships with our intelligence partners. And I'll tell you, the relationship that we have today with the National Reconnaissance Office is the best it's ever been. We have shared strategies, shared CONOPS, we have shared operation centers where we work together, we have shared programs, and so it's seamless as we both focus on protecting and defending those capabilities that are in the space domain. We have, as the Secretary mentioned, a broad array of partnerships interagency-wise that provide great advantage. I was just on the phone yesterday with Administrator Brightside talking about the event that he tweeted out. And again, it's not just on that. We have in the launch coming up at the end of this month, we have an Air Force astronaut that's going to be part of that crew that launches. We share some training capabilities with NASA. So there's a lot of partnership there. And then on the international partnership side, which the Space Foundation is so helpful to us on in bringing the global community together. We train together, we exercise together, we have, again, shared programs together. And I will tell you, we trust each other. And that's going to be so important. Just like we operate in any other domain, we are going to operate with our close partners.
So General Raymond, a quick follow-up on that, and you've mentioned a couple of times the importance of the international partners. So kind of looking at that, looking at security cooperation from an international perspective, how will the Space Force or perhaps Space Command in your other hat, how do they integrate with our coalition partners as a force multiplier? And do we have the necessary interoperability requirements established to be able to rapidly respond to something evolving in space?
So let me tackle it in two parts. Let me talk about it in both of my hats. In my U.S. Space Command hat, as a combatant commander, you have security cooperation as one of the critical missions of a combatant command. And so we have elevated that security cooperation with the establishment of that command. When we stood up U.S. Space Command, you may have noticed we renamed an organization that used to be, I used to command it, it used to be called the Joint Force Space Component Command. It's now the Combined Force Space Component Command. It's a combined organization with our partners being part of that. And that's a huge step forward. The focus of that is out at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California with a combined space operations center where we have a combined operations center doing the business of our nations together. And that has provided us significant advantage. In our organized train and equip hat in the Space Force, the Secretary leads, we also are looking to partner with our allied partners on developing space capabilities that are mutually beneficial. So, for example, over this course of the last year or so, we have entered into a partnership with Norway to put hosted payloads on Norwegian satellites. That's going to save us about $900 million, and it's going to get payloads onto orbit quicker. We have a similar partnership with Japan, where we are putting a hosted payload on the Japanese satellite. As we build our command and control capability, we're doing that and developing standards with our international partners to be able to do that together as well. So I have seen over the course of the last 3 or 4 years a significant growth in our partnerships, and that security cooperation is critical to us.
A slight transition as you talk about some of the technology and capabilities, and we talked about existing capabilities out there. We hear a lot about NASA's technology, Perseverance, which is the new Mars rover, Ingenuity, the new Mars helicopter. And understandably, we don't sometimes hear a lot about defense capabilities and technology for obvious reasons. Is there anything you can share with us, or can you talk about any advances in space technology, space systems that the Space Force will be using or focusing on in its budget in order to enable faster or more advanced technological capabilities?
Yes, I'd be happy to. One of the critical components of standing up the United States Space Force was to get after speed of acquisition, to be able to go fast, to be able to stay ahead of the growing challenges that we see in space. And one of the things the National Defense Authorization Act asks us to do is to take a look at the acquisition processes that we have and to come up with an acquisition process that's custom built, purpose built for space. And so we've done that, and that's on the final stages of the coordination and being released. I think what you will see is we're driving unity of effort across the department. We're going to reduce bureaucracy. We're going to more effectively delegate down to lower levels to allow us to go faster. when you look at going fast, one of the things that we're also doing is making a shift towards software and being able to be more agile and being a digital service that can move at speed. So we have software factories, if you will, that are out in Los Angeles helping us develop apps that can go onto ops centers, and they're going faster. If you look at what we're doing in the space domain, I think it's twofold. One, we're looking at how do you have distributed architectures for more resilience, and at the same time, we need to make sure that they can conduct the mission and that we can protect and defend those capabilities. And so I'm very excited with where we are in this process. I think we're already seeing gains even in the short 4 months since we've stood up. I would suggest here mission capability that are defendable, that can move at speed with software technology, and with an organization structure that allows us to go fast and delegate down to what is local.
I would just add that under the leadership of Chief Raymond, we're seeing new breakthroughs in technology and investments in technology, from energy to materials, all kinds of technologies. It's really exciting to see, and almost boggles the mind to think of the ways that these new capabilities will be applied.
So, Madam Secretary, General, thank you for that. So on that same kind of note, but maybe transitioning a little bit, tremendous capability, obviously for the defense and for intelligence. But right now across the country, COVID-19 is on the minds of Americans, is impacting us in many ways. Has the Space Force, or how is the Space Force supporting the nation's response to COVID-19 and helping out in this pandemic?
As is the case with so much of society, space is integrally involved in the solution to our COVID problems. And I think, Chief, you want to go into some detail on some of what we're doing there.
Yes, Madam Secretary. So first of all, I would say, what we're doing is we're playing by the guidelines. We're staying, following the rules, wearing masks, to being COVID compliance. And that's critical to us because we have an obligation to keep the space capabilities up and running for our nation. And we have to do that without fail. And so we've taken very active measures to protect our crew force, our personnel, so they can go onto the Ops Center and operate these capabilities. We've seen examples like in any humanitarian assistance operation where space capabilities play an important role, whether it's communications, whether it's GPS with position navigation and timing, and knowing where our medical community is inside, for example, New York City and the hospitals, to make sure that we can protect those folks as well. We've also optimized bandwidth to allow the Navy hospital ship off the coast of California to have the bandwidth it needs to do to support its mission. So first and foremost, we're protecting our people so we can continue to provide the nationally critical capabilities that our nation relies on in the full spectrum of operations, from humanitarian assistance to combat. And we're optimizing those constellations based on requests from Northcom and others to provide them the capabilities that they need.
Thank you. So even with all of this going on around us, and this question actually comes online from our online audience, we've got so much going on around us, and it shouldn't be missed that we're actually standing up a brand new military service, as we pointed out at the opening. And this hasn't happened since the 1950s. I mean, it's truly historic. So the question is, that it's been submitted is, in this century, the 21st century, how do you best recruit, prepare, and train the next generation of space warfighters? What are the skills and talents that the Space Force is looking for to have within its ranks?
I start, and then well, we start with the recruiting video that was broadcast just at the beginning of this discussion. This is sort of the debut. That recruiting video will be put online and broadcast starting today as a method by which the United States Space Force story gets told. So we're now seeing an effort to talk to the folks out there who would like to be a part of an exciting new happening place, where if your place in the planet is off the planet, the United States Space Force may be the place for you. recruiting will be to the public, but it also is, as you may have seen, on April 18th, the United States Air Force Academy graduated its first class that had 86 cadets that were commissioned into the United States Space Force. So that is the logical and predictable location from which some recruitment would occur. But we're looking for people who have STEM backgrounds, as you would expect, but also in other diverse fields of study to build an entity from the ground up that is in the exciting business of exploring, defending, and applying capabilities in space. So it's a very exciting time. And what has happened so far is that recruitment hasn't been a problem. If people find out that there's a possibility of joining the Space Force, there seems to be an avalanche of applicants. So Chief, you might have some detail on that.
Yeah, it's a good challenge to have, but we have more people knocking on our door wanting to come join us than we probably have positions to have. I mean, this is, I guarantee you can go down the hall and look at my email, and in the first 100 emails, there's probably 15 or 20 that will say, hey, how do I join the Space Force? The Secretary talked about the Air Force Academy class. Those 86 cadets are really the foundation of this as they come onto the books of the Space Force. They're incredible, talented folks. We've got 2 of those cadets going off to Harvard for a master's degree. We have another cadet that's going to MIT Lincoln Labs for a master's degree. We've got some of the best software talent that came out of the academy, and so it's a good challenge to have. We see a ton of interest in. We're excited for the future.
That is definitely a great problem to have. Is an overwhelming number of people, and our congratulations certainly goes out to the 86 new Space Force officers. So here's a follow-up question that just came online. It's actually a pretty good one. So with standing up the Space Force and the personnel requirements you need, the question is will there be a reserve component to the Space Force? And if so, will it be possible for the other branches of reserves, and this gentleman's in the Navy clearly, for example, the Navy reserves, to transfer into the Space Force's reserve component?
Yes, there will be a reserve component. We operate today very closely with the Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserve, if you will. The National Defense Authorization Act that established the Space Force asked us to do a study and to review that total force participation going forward, and we're doing that. But we rely on those people and those capabilities today, and we will in the future. We fully expect to open this up to other services. Today, other service members can volunteer to join, and with the support of their service, can apply and transfer over. And in the future, I think there'll be greater opportunities as we look to build unity of effort across the department and expand this more fully to the other services as well. But I think there's great opportunities.
Maybe it's important to say that while being a member of the Space Force requires transferring in, giving up what uniform you might have worn before and coming into the Space Force, there also will be opportunities where people from the other services work in Space Force billets as an assignment, but not becoming a member of the Space Force. So
yes, ma'am. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, we'll be looking for talent, and there'll be a diversity of uniforms. Many of them will be Space Force uniforms, but the 16,000 who became a part of the Space Force team on the first day, on December 20th, they wear a different uniform, but they do Space Force work, and they are in Space Force jobs, so they have not transferred into the only then starting up Space Force organization.
Yeah, so if you look at for example, the question that came up before on the 86 cadets, to give you a feel for what they will do. So of those 86 cadets, 50-ish of those will go off to do space operations. There'll be others that will be engineers. There'll be acquisition professionals. We've got cyber professionals. We've got intelligence professionals. We've got software engineering talent that's come in. So this isn't just the space operations piece of this. This is a set of career fields that come together. And again, as the Secretary said, we have 16,000 folks today assigned to those jobs, and as we build the scrolls, if you will, of the Space Force.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, making strong progress so quick. So I'm going to transition us now, kind of the operational environment and current threats. General Raymond, you spoke about some of those threats. So how will the Space Force and the United States compete in this new warfighting domain against adversaries such as China, Iran, and Russia?
Well, first of all, let me just state that we do not want to get into a conflict that begins or extends in the space. We want to deter that. The way you do that is to do that from a position of strength. What gives us a position of strength is our partners, and to develop those strong partnerships that are so important to us. And we talked a lot about that earlier in the conversation. We also need to have systems that are defendable and that are more resilient. We have to continue to train our operators to be to have the warfighting skills necessary to accomplish this mission. And that's really a two-part challenge. It's developing space operators that have a warfighting mindset, but it's also developing more traditional joint warfighters that have a better understanding of space. And the Space Force and U.S. Space Command will be in good positions to be able to do that. We completely overhauled our training program, right? How do we develop our goals? I think the other key thing that we will have in being able to compete is to look at our classification structure and figure out where we may be able to overly classify and what capabilities we should talk about and what capabilities we should message. And then finally, we want to develop modes of behavior. We want to do that with our partners because, again, going back to my first statement, we don't want to get into a conflict that begins or extends in space. We want to keep that domain safe for all. We will do that from a position of strength, and we will do that with our partners.
So on that note, a bit of a follow-up, and you mentioned some of the adversaries, the Iranians and the Chinese out there with some of their capabilities that they've introduced. How concerned should the American people be with these recent developments, and how is the Space Force positioning to address aggressive actions against some of these actors?
Go ahead.
I think the average American needs to understand just how reliant their life is on space. Space fuels our American way of life. Space also fuels our American way of war. And I would suggest to this audience that we are the best in the world at space with our partners, and that with U.S. Space Command and the U.S. Space Force, we will remain the best in the world at space, and we'll be able to go fast as we talked about earlier. So our job is to make sure that American citizens don't have to be concerned. That, typically when you walk in a room and you turn on the light switch, space is always there. That needs to be the case in the future as well. That's why the establishment of both the U.S. Space Command and the Space Force are so important. We have the best people in the world. We have the best capabilities in the world. We have integrated space like no other country. We have the best partnerships in the world. So we're in a good position, and we're only going to get stronger.
Thomas, maybe the launch later this month is a metaphor for America's leadership. Everybody has the image of man walking on the moon 50 years ago, when it was America that was clearly in the lead. For the past 9 years, if we want to go to our $110 billion investment in the sky, above the sky, in space, we had buy a seat from the Russian, buy a seat in the Soyuz. And the United States had to use that as their method by which we get to our space station. Later this month, that's going to be reversed. We're going to have American, and in fact, commercial American access to space. It's an important time in transforming America's role in space and returning to that leadership that we once knew.
So thank you for that. So I've just got a very interesting question from our live audience, just tweeted in, and so we've got some respected people actually watching today. So this is from Neil deGrasse Tyson's. I'm sorry?
Former board member of the Space Foundation, as I recall.
He was. So we've got a lot of alumni participating today in various ways. Not all threats, as as he puts it, not all threats to our space security involve political adversaries. Asteroids, of course, put us in Earth at risk, but also solar flares and space debris put us our assets in risk, our space assets at risk. Will there be active elements of the Space Force used against these threats?
Yeah, so Neil, if you're out there listening, it's good to chat with you again. If you recall, when I interviewed with you in your New York office, after you asked me a series of questions, I asked you a question on what should we be focused on, and this was the area that you said we should be focused on, and we are focusing on it. In fact, again, in partnership with NASA, we had that conversation over the last 24 hours. We are committed to keeping the domain safe. We act as the space traffic control for the world. We provide warning and assessment of every object against every object in space to make sure things don't go. We actually warn adversaries that they're about to hit a piece of debris that they created to make sure that more debris isn't created. So we are committed to the safety of the domain. On the asteroid front, we have the best space domain capabilities in the world. We have strong partnerships with NASA. Administration Stein and I have committed to increasing that partnership going forward, and look to put some focus on that inside the Space Force. Thanks for the question.
Let me take an analogous response to that. COVID was not what the United States military trains to respond to, but the United States military was among the first calls from the White House and from HHS when COVID was becoming a big concern. When we needed to get American citizens out of Wuhan and return them to the United States, they called the United States military to do that. So it is important that while what we often think about are malevolent behaviors, competing political forces, it is really important to recognize that it is also natural forces that the United States military is called upon to defend against.
I think that's a great point. We're close to the close, and although we've had several questions coming in, I would be remiss if I don't ask this one because it's the number one that seems to be sent in from over the online questioner. So the Netflix and the new series, The Space Force. Have you seen the trailers, and what advice would you give creator and star Steve Carell and his castmates on the show? And I've actually got one of my own. It's on kind of culture. They're starting to develop an entire culture there. And one of the questions we've got online is, are you going to try to steal their anthem as the official Space Force anthem?
Kokomo. We're all into Kokomo. Gee.
So I have seen the trailer. The one piece of advice I'd give Steve Carell is to get a haircut. He's looking a little too shaggy if he wants to play the Space Force chief. I'll tell you, it was funny. Probably a year ago, I was at home and I was looking at my bank account and I saw where dollars were being taken out for Netflix. And I'm like, at the time, and please Netflix don't come after me, but I didn't watch Netflix. And I said, why am I paying for this every month? And I said, I'm going to stop. I cut it off. And within about 32 seconds of stopping that, all three of my children from all over the different places in the United States came up on the net and said, hey, what happened to Netflix? Well, they were clearly watching it. And so immediately put that back on. And then about a few months later, one of my daughters texted me and said, hey, Space Force is really getting big. He said, that Netflix is going to do a show on SpaceFlix and Steve Carell is going to play it. And I said, that can't be. He doesn't look like me. And then there was this thing going on Twitter on who should play the Secretary of Air Force, who should play the Secretary of Defense, who should play General Raymond. And the leading vote was Bruce Willis. So I was hoping for Bruce Willis, but Steve Carell's a great actor. And I'll tell you, I love his shows. So we're looking forward to watch.
Seems to me that it's just further evidence that space is where things are happening. So whether it's Netflix or in the United States Pentagon, space is where things are happening.
I think that's true. Everybody wants to be part of this new movement. So that kind of brings us to the close. Madam Secretary, General Raymond, this has been a great discussion. Really appreciate it. But before we go, I want to give you one last opportunity to make any final comments.
Well, I would just make two quick comments. One is thank you to the Space Foundation for decades now, I have been proud to have an association with the Space Foundation, and I'd like to just acknowledge the leadership the Space Foundation provides in bringing people who have an interest in space from around the world together through one giant symposium, but through other elements throughout the year. The other point I'd like to make is the United States, and especially the United States Department of the Air Force, is indeed fortunate to have someone of the talent of Jay Raymond to lead the startup of this historic occasion. Whether it was Plato or Socrates that said the beginning is the most important part, we couldn't have a better leader for the beginning than who we have with General Jay Raymond.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. Again, thank you for your
My
leadership.
pleasure.
I also want to thank the foundation. I've got a close tie to the foundation, having spent the vast majority of my career in Colorado Springs, and with the benefits that that symposium gives us. And we look forward to participating in it when you reschedule it here later this year. I would say for the audience that might be listening, those that might be space experts, on the other end of the spectrum, maybe those that just have an interest in it. There is no more critical time or exciting time to be in our business. And if you are interested in serving, we're interested in having you. So please reach out. There's the Space Force website that's out there that can give you information on how best to get in contact with the team. But we'd love to have you on our team. Again, thanks for the opportunity to chat today, and we look forward to seeing you in person when we get an opportunity to do so.
Well, Madam Secretary General Raymond, thank you so much for joining us. This has really been a great discussion and a great way for the Space Foundation to kick off our live webinar series. We appreciate your time. We know how busy you are. We truly appreciate your time today, as well as your candid comments and insights. And having you on the program today has been remarkable. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
I also want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially those that were participating using our hashtag AskSpaceForce. You can continue to use that to join the conversation. As a reminder, this event will be posted online for later viewing at spacefoundation.org. We'll share the link of this recording with the registrants via email. So please feel free to watch again and to share that with those that were unable to attend today. Thank you for joining us. From all of us here at the Space Foundation, stay healthy and have a great day.